Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're going to systematically dismantle a massive, really expensive myth in the enterprise tech world when it comes to sovereign AI and self-hosting. Look, if you're involved in planning or budgeting AI for your organization, what we're about to cover is absolutely crucial. We're going to dive into the hard numbers from 2026, strip away all that marketing hype, and find out what it literally costs to own your AI.
So for the past 2 years or so, there's been this very persistent piece of standard advice just echoing through boardrooms and IT departments everywhere. The conventional wisdom was pretty simple. If you wanted true sovereignty, meaning total, absolute control over your data and your models, you had to host your AI models yourself. And the assumed bonus? Everyone kind of just thought that doing it yourself would naturally save you a ton of money compared to handing over cash to big tech for API access.
The old assumption was basically a simple trade-off, right? You gained control and low costs, but you had to settle for a weaker model. Well, that deal is completely dead. Today, the capability gap between open models and closed frontier models has practically vanished. But the cost gap? That runs in the exact opposite direction of what the sovereignty crowd assumes. The new reality is that control means you get a great model, for sure, but you're paying a very high premium for it.
Section 1. The True Costs Breakdown. Let's look at the self-hosting realities.
Let's look at the true arithmetic of self-hosting, stripping away all those theoreticals to see what a rack of GPUs and a stack of open weights actually cost you in practice. There are three main pillars to this cost, and unfortunately, most enthusiasts really only ever budget for the very first one, the bare metal GPU cost. Because running a serious open model in production requires several H100 class GPUs. A bare metal configuration with 2 to 4 H100s, that'll run you anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 a month. And if you go the hyperscaler route on demand, an 8 GPU node easily pushes past $20,000 a month. And by the way, that is before storage. But what's really surprising here is that the assumption that GPUs would just keep getting cheaper, which honestly a lot of 2026 business plans relied on, has completely failed. On-demand H100 prices actually increased by 14% year over year, hitting around $390 an hour. Why? Because demand bounced back way faster than supply.
And then we hit the absolute silent killer of AI budgets, the idle trap. Seriously, if you take away just one concept from this explainer, make it this one right here.
Here is the fundamental flaw in self-hosting economics. A dedicated GPU charges you for 720 hours a month, regardless of whether tokens are actually flowing through it or not. The harsh reality is that most internal enterprise tools, agent experiments, or departmental solutions only utilize about 5 to 10% of that time. That leaves a massive, massive slice of paid idle waste. You see, API providers can bundle the demand of thousands of customers together to keep their utilization super high, but a single enterprise just can't do that. Because of this trap, your effective cost per token when you're self-hosting can be astronomically higher. We're talking sometimes an entire order of magnitude higher than what you just pay an API provider.
Finally, we have the human cost. Servers don't just run themselves, right? You need specialized DevOps or MLOps engineers to patch the inference servers, rotate the models, monitor the queues, and desperately fix output quality drops after driver updates. Over in Europe, these pros average 62 to 89,000 euros annually, with senior roles easily topping 100,000. In the US, fully loaded costs are roughly double that. Even if you optimistically allocate just a quarter of an engineer's time to this, you're adding thousands to your monthly bill. That completely wipes out any theoretical hardware savings you thought you had. The bottom line here? For most organizations, self-hosting is simply not cheaper.
No way! Section 2. The capability gap has vanished. Open models now compete.
So if self-hosting is vastly more expensive and a huge headache, why on earth do it? Well, historically, the other big argument against self-hosting was that open-weight models were simply worse. But here in 2026, that excuse has totally evaporated. Just take Z.A's GLM 5.2, released in June 2026, going head-to-head with a proprietary flagship like Claude Opus 4.8. GLM 5.2 is this massive 753 billion parameter model with a true MIT license and a 1 million token context window. And on terminal coding benchmarks, it scores an 81.0. That is just 4 points behind Opus 4.8's 85.0. Now, just to be perfectly impartial here, sources do note that for ultra-long, multi-hour software engineering runs, the proprietary frontier models definitely still hold a clear lead. But for the broad middle of enterprise workloads, summarization, extraction, RAG, mid-range agents, an open model you can run totally air-gapped is effectively playing on par with the absolute best money can buy.
Section 3. The value of control and why organizations buy sovereignty.
This brings us to a really critical pivot in our understanding.
If the models are basically equal, but self-hosting costs way more, what are we actually paying for? The truth? Sovereignty was never actually about saving money. It was always about purchasing control. And let me tell you, control is incredibly valuable. Gartner estimates European spending on sovereign cloud infrastructure will hit $12.6 billion this year. That's an 83% jump in a single year. This money isn't chasing cost savings. Organizations are buying control to pass strict regulatory audits, to defy foreign export controls that could suddenly just shut down their production systems, and to absolutely guarantee data jurisdiction. Regulations like the EU AI Act and GDPR have turned data residency from a nice-to-have preference into a hard, non-negotiable requirement for procurement.
So, organizations face a pretty stark choice. On the left, you've got the pure API strategy. You get zero ops, no idle costs, and the best models. But you have a really high dependence on hyperscalers. On the right, we have emerging platforms like Mistral Forge, which launched at NVIDIA's GTC. This offers what they call managed sovereignty. You get the data residency and the model ownership without needing a massive internal ML infrastructure team to run it. It solves the whole self-hosting nightmare. But there's always a catch. You are essentially trading hyperscaler dependence for platform dependence, because right now, you're limited strictly to Mistral's architectures.
Section 4. The hybrid solution, utilizing intelligent routing.
Now, here is the great news. The most economically sound deployment in 2026 doesn't actually force you to make a binary choice between the severe lock-in of Forge, the brutal expense of self-hosting, or the total dependency of pure APIs. The crucial point here is routing. This is how you actually make the economics sing. A local-first router classifies every single request coming in. You send about 70 to 90% of your traffic to local open models. Because you're funneling the vast majority of your bulk requests here, your utilization stays incredibly high, which completely dodges that idle trap we talked about earlier. Then you only route the long, highly complex, non-sensitive tasks up to an expensive frontier API. And, obviously, anything containing sensitive data is hard-pinned to your local hardware, guaranteeing your sovereignty.
This hybrid routing model, which some architects are calling Bifrost, is the ultimate sweet spot. By eliminating the idle trap and keeping sensitive data on controlled hardware, organizations are actually seeing total overall savings of 30 to 50% compared to purely using APIs. You get to keep the frontier capabilities in your back pocket for when you absolutely need them, but you process your massive bulk volume profitably right in-house.
The ultimate takeaway from all this data is a total paradigm shift. You are no longer sacrificing quality for control. The open models are simply too good now. Control is no longer this bitter compromise you just have to swallow. It's simply a quantifiable line item in your budget that you can actively manage and optimize through intelligent routing.
So as you look at your own AI strategy, you really need to calculate your utilization honestly. Avoid the idle trap at all costs. And ask yourself this final, critical question. When you push for sovereign AI, is your organization buying a highly necessary regulatory insurance policy, or are you just blindly paying for an ideology? Honestly, both might be legitimate purchases, but only one of them belongs in a realistic business plan. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you navigate your AI investments with absolute clarity. Catch you next time.